That should fix the sound. Sorry about that, you missed all of my conducting, so I'll try it again.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man
Morning, Karen. Hey, Eric. Happy Easter to those celebrating.
In the urban room of the Congress Hotel in
With
Chicago.
Big Jim
And first of all,
Colosimo,
Berlin's greatest hit.
Shel Arnav Shel Easter. That's Hebrew for colorful eggs from the Easter Bunny. Hey, Tom. Hey, Melissa. The sound should be fixed now. Good morning, Starshine. From sunny Juliet. Juliet says hello. Hey, Nancy. Hey, Kathy and Frank. I'm conducting Benny Goodman today. How about that? Hey, Bridget. Morning, Cindy in Detroit. Hey, Gene. Hey, Jerry. Hey, Darlene over on YouTube. Hey, Chuck. Hey, Lisa, Joanne, Jerry, Kelly. Anybody I'm missing? Hey, Marita. Hey, Diane. Hey, Larry. Joanne, I hear you. Hey, Luann. Hey, Todd. Hey, Octavio. Good morning all around. Thanks for joining me on a holiday day. Hey, Gail. Hey, Carol. Hey, Georgia. Oh, yeah, this is definitely a casserole day, Laura. Very important part of Christian ethnic cuisine. As I understand. Hey, Mom. Hey, Karen. Hey, Joanne. Diane, probably no test today. Hey, Todd. Very excited. Wednesday night, I'm going to get all the footage so we can do Grave Robbing 101 NYC properly here. Hey, Keely. And Nina. That seems fairly comprehensive. Is it Ostara as well? I think it's Ostara. Hey, Laura. Hey, John. I learned to say colorful eggs from the Easter Bunny in Hebrew. It seems Zavoni, Zavani, Shel Ha'aranav Shel Easter. Hey, Anna Maria. I'm at 255 days on Duolingo for Hebrew. John, we'll say that the New York edition is 102. But I'm going to go get all the footage. I'm going to be, every spare minute I got, I'm going to be making footage for New York tours. Don't know if I'll make it to Trinity Uptown this week. But I'll be back in town. It looks like the LA thing I was going to do got moved 2 weeks later and to New York. Carol, Passover's still going. I'm still avoiding most of my favorite foods. I'm gonna have to wait until late in my New York trip to get to the Papaya King. Hey, Gene. Hey, Carol. Hey, Ann. Hey, Londa. Ah, Rebecca, that's a good one. I like the movie version of Jesus Christ Superstar where Herod looks like Newman from Seinfeld. Just picture, hello, Herod. Hello, Jesus. Hey, Carolyn Joyce. Hey, David. Hey, Kathleen. Morning, Nancy. Laura, that was a very poor decision. You should have definitely bought all of the Reese's peanut butter eggs. Hey, welcome, Joyce from England. Hey, Nancy. Octavio, very true. I don't know why they always show the Ten Commandments today. Yes, next weekend. I'm going to be just fresh back from New York. It's going to be nice and warm next weekend. Looking at a high of 69. Should be real nice. And so we're going to do a hybrid tour next weekend. Graceland is going to be in person, but I'm going to have somebody film it at the same time. So, live stream tour. Come on out. Morning, Jocelyn. Hey, Nancy. And it'll be a little bit tricky because there's a Cubs game that can mess with parking for us a little bit. I haven't seen Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter, but I'd like to. Well, thanks, Kathleen. So we've only tried a hybrid tour once or twice, really. We did it once for Architecture of Mysterious Chicago, and it went pretty well. Well, Gene, they were given to Moses some time after Passover. It was after they got away. And it took a while. Awesome, Kristen. See you there. And once again, if you're on the Patreon, which I don't think I have the overlay for right here, for the Patreon, the ticket tier on Patreon now costs less than an actual ticket. You know, prices go up everywhere. I'm still below the next leading brand. But I'm not raising the Patreon tier. Well, it's part of the overall Passover story, but there's a whole separate holiday a couple of months down the road for Moses receiving the Torah. Morning, Gene. Hey, Julianne. Todd, often. I got a chronic sinus infection, so I'm coughing a bit. That's the same reason it usually is. Hey, Susan. Hey, Sue. Trying my luck conducting. Oh, hey, there is some news, too. Not only is William Randall going to have a marked grave at Graceland in a couple of months, but in July, there will also be a marker put in place for Seth Payne, the abolitionist wizard. There's a biography of him coming out, and his biographer just informed me she has arranged to have a marker put there, so this is going to be awesome. The book is already going to be out of date when it comes out, but that's the best of all possible reasons. Morning, everybody.
And they all loved it. They all
hey, Heidi.
When they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein. Rosetta.
Midwest Horse Show is a new one for me. I don't think that'll probably interfere with parking at Graceland. Dana, awesome. The Apple mug. I've been trying to reproduce all the outfits. Well, not all of them. There's some of the outfits in Get Back that I just cannot pull off. Oh no, this one is all on Nancy, who is doing the biography of Seth Payne. But you know, I just put up a TikTok about him and how I wish we could get it marked. He wasn't top of the list. If I suggested marking him, there's probably a few people we should do otherwise, unless we had like a Seth Payne-related organization or a biographer involved. But a biographer was already involved behind the scenes, and I didn't even know. I mean, I've talked to her a little bit. Hey, Steven. We'll let Benny Goodman finish him another tune. Weirdly warm in here today. I'm going to open the window. Hang on. That should help and should also get Miles really interested. He loves open windows. Ah, Kristen, that is a sacrifice. You know we will be doing more Graceland tours. Hey, Ed. Hey, Linda. Good morning all around. Hey, Marcia. Happy Easter to those who celebrate. Gonna go turn the Benny Goodman off for a moment here.
Benny Goodman is being presented from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. And now, Benny Goodman.
All right, that is Benny Goodman live from the Joseph Urban Room in the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. We're a couple of minutes after 10 o'clock, so I think it is time that we go ahead and get started. Welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've got pants on the floor. That's unusual. Okay, but welcome along. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including H.H. Holmes' The True History, Flickering Empire, that's how Chicago invented the U.S. film industry, Mysterious Chicago, the book, Murder Maps USA, brand new from Thames and Hudson. That's got quite a few of the gangster stories in it. And coming this summer, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. What have I got out here? Okay. Trying to take a look at what we're doing. One thing that I realized early on in the pandemic is if I'm doing virtual tours, we're not really bound by time or space. We can cover all kinds of things I normally never would. Like, I've never been able to do an in-person tour at Mount Carmel Cemetery or a gangster tour that included all the stuff at Mount Carmel Cemetery where a vast majority of the gangsters seem to be buried. Not that there's exact statistics on this, because it kind of depends on who was really a gangster, who wasn't, who do we count, who do we not. I mean, there are people at Mount Olivet, there are people at Rose Hill, there are several people from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre over at Irving Park Cemetery, but quite a number of the most famous ones ended up at Mount Carmel. So we're going to be incorporating street scenes and a whole overview of Chicago gangland in its modern form, right here from a comfort of our own house without having to worry about how far apart some of these locations are or how hard it would be to get a bus into there. So welcome along. We're back to doing in-person tours again. Next weekend is going to be a hybrid tour, so you can watch right here, or you can come join us at Graceland Cemetery. Ticket information should be up on MysteriousChicago.com. But let's go ahead and get started with a story of the 1918 Illinois Central Railway robbery. Now, this is a tunnel on Randolph that currently leads to the parking lot for Millennium Park. But it used to be it took you over across the street where Millennium Park is now was the Illinois Central Railroad Station. And one day in 1918, a group of gangsters timed out so they realized when the money from the place was going to be getting transferred, busted in, shot the guy carrying it, ran off with the money. Among those suspected of the crime, though no one was ever quite convicted, Terrible Tommy O'Connor and George Bugs Moran, who would later go on to be one of the heads of the North Side Mob. This was a major story at the time. It was a point when gangland was kind of in transition. We had a couple of organized gangs of Chicago criminals at the time, but not really organized in the modern sense, and not without a driving thing that could really make them a whole lot of money, like Prohibition bootleg liquor. Now, Terrible Tommy O'Connor was eventually captured a few years later for a couple of other murders, but managed to escape from prison right before they were supposed to hang him, and he was never caught. They had to keep the gallows in the basement of the jail till well into the 1970s because his sentence said he must hang by the neck until he was dead. So even 50 years after they switched to the chair, if they ever caught him, theoretically they were going to have to hang him. Finally, in the 70s, a judge ruled that he must be dead by now anyway. Moran would eventually rise to being the head of the North Side Mob. There's another thing around the same time. There was a guy named Earl Bopp who escaped from prison but was pretty quickly recaptured. He broke out with the help of a guy named Frank McCurlin, who was later captured over here at 78th and Crandon, shooting up ghosts. He is thought to be the guy who introduced the Tommy gun to Chicago gangland, and years later he lost what marbles he had, something that happened to a lot of these guys, and was caught here shooting down the street, saying he was shooting at the ghosts of all of the people he had killed. He didn't last too much long with the gang after that. We're also going to cover just briefly, some of these things just are not going. This is a little street in what is now Chinatown. I seem to have lost myself here. Here I am. There's a little street in Chinatown, but that building in the middle appears to have been the location of Sam Cardinella's pool hall. Now, Sam Cardinella was a guy who, if you believe the official story, it was like he had read Oliver Twist and thought that it was a how-to manual. This guy was running a pool hall out of this building. I think it was this building. No two sources, even in the legal archives and all of the legal records about this case, give the exact same address of where it is, but I think it was probably this one. Apparently, he was luring kids into there, and then he would teach them how to commit crimes and send them out on robberies and other assorted errands. So, eventually, they confessed to something like 400 holdups and quite a number of murders at the same time. But here's the thing about it. Most of those kids really had been committing crimes since a long time before that pool hall was even open. Digging through his records down to the legal archives in Springfield, going through his executive clemency file, I found that there was this huge and rather convincing movement to have Sam Cardinella pardoned, or at least commuted to life in prison after they sentenced him to hang. Cardinella himself was illiterate. He had to sign with an X, but there was this hundreds and hundreds of pages petition going around. And the petition was organized by a guy named Mike Merlot, who would go on to be a really big player in the early gangland of Chicago. He was the head of an organization called the Unione Siciliana, which officially was a civic organization for Sicilian Americans, but by the mid-1920s, it was an incredibly powerful arm of the mob. Even the biggest heads of the mob, Capone and guys like that, wouldn't pull off a hit without getting an approval from Mike Merlot. So he was heading up this effort to say that Cardinella was being railroaded. There was a lot of talk at the time. Saloons had just been closed down, and the cops were all saying, well, it's not helping with crime. All the crime has just moved to the pool halls. Trouble with a capital T, that rhymes with P, and that stands for pool. So these were petitions were probably set out at Unione Siciliana meetings. You notice in it that the addresses aren't sequential, but on a given page, a lot of the addresses will be from the same neighborhood. And it also included a lot of people who would go on to be big gangsters later on, like right here. Oh, I gotta scroll for this one. But among these, I still haven't gone through all of these. It's like hundreds of pages. I keep hoping I'll bump into Al Capone in there someplace. But one of them is Frank the Enforcer Nitti is on here under the name Frank R. Nitto, his official name. I seem to have lost track of where on the page it is, but it's on there someplace, along with all of their addresses. So Dropbox just did a weird thing and messed up all of my OBS texts. But Sam Cardinella was eventually hanged. Mike Merlot continued to be a force in the city at the time, but this is about the first time I find him really connected with gangster stuff. Now, at the time, there were a couple of Big Jims operating in Chicago. One was Big Jim O'Leary, who had this mansion in the back of the Yards neighborhood that several people have tried to get me into lately. It's up for sale right now. Big Jim was the son of Mrs. O'Leary, the famous scapegoat of the Great Chicago Fire. His initials are still visible in here. There's also some tunnels in the house that people love to say are part of his gambling operations because he was a gambling kingpin. More likely they were just for servants to sneak around without being seen. But also there's this image built into it. Faces and things are generally a common decorative touch, but this is said to be a portrait of his mother. If that's true, it's the only portrait we have of Mrs. O'Leary. Big Jim O'Leary, when liquor was outlawed in 1920, was one of the most open violators of the rule. Everybody knew if you went to Big Jim's place, he was still getting shipments of beer. He was doing this really very openly, partly because he was bribing everybody who could find, and the cops were only too happy to take these bribes. The other Big Jim operated down here on Wabash Street near 22nd. And that was a guy named Big Jim Colosimo, who had a restaurant, would have been right up here past the White Castle, over into the bricks. It's a place called Colosimo. It was a big fancy place. It was opera singers in the evening, and then after hours, the jazz would get started. Big Jim was also the vice lord of Chicago. If you were running a numbers racket or a house of ill repute or anything like that, you were probably paying off Big Jim. But then he married one of his chorus girls and decided he was going to clean up his act a little bit. So when bootleg liquor started, he told everybody, listen, I don't think we're going to get involved in bootleg liquor here in Chicago. I mean, we're still going to have the brothels and everything and all of the gambling operations, but no, I don't think we're going to do any bootleg liquor here in Chicago. This made him a huge target because every gangster knew that this was going to be like brewing your own money. So he was shot to death right here inside of the place. Now, the prevailing story about it is that the hit was carried out by a guy named Frankie Yale, a New York big shot who had previously been the boss of young Alphonse Capone. Now, it makes sense that they would bring in somebody from out of town, but at the same time, I just have a hard time believing that Frankie Yale would have been doing that kind of dirty work on his own by then. But one of the rumors that went around in the city was that young Al Capone had carried out the hit personally. Probably wasn't true, but it probably helped build Capone's reputation. Really, Capone at the time was just working for Johnny Torrio. John Torrio was the one who gathered everybody up and said, okay, now Big Jim is out of the way. We're definitely going to be doing bootleg liquor around here. What we're not going to do is fight. We are not going to do any kind of fighting around here. What we're going to do is we're going to divide the city into territories. You take yours, we'll take ours. Plenty of money for everybody. Believe it or not, this actually worked out fairly well. And Colosimo had one of the first really big gangland funerals. He was buried in a $12,000 casket and put into a fantastic mausoleum at Oakwood Cemetery that, frankly, I imagine probably looks cooler now than it did back then. Now that it's gotten kind of water-stained and grimy. Somebody apparently tried to break in to get that $12,000 bronze casket. Well, $12,000 in 1920 money. So Torrio promoted his young lieutenant, became the head of the gangland, and brought in his young lieutenant, a kid named Al Capone. Capone first made the news in the early 1920s when he was caught driving drunk on Randolph Street. He would have been going the opposite direction you can go on Randolph now, crashed his car into a parked taxi cab, then jumped out of the place, started waving a gun around and saying, I'm going to shoot anybody who says this was my fault. Goodness, what a jerk. Caught waving the gun around. They brought him into the police station and he said, I'm going to have every one of you fired. Don't you know who I am? Total jerk. And this is where Torrio really came in with Capone's education. Torrio taught Capone manners. He taught him the difference between saying, are you looking for trouble? And we don't want any trouble. Basically, he taught him public relations. Now, the police station he was taken to at the time would have been in the city hall. So the city hall that is now standing over here is one of the buildings that we actually can trace Al Capone to. We do know that he was at least brought in to be booked here at the police station one time. You tend to hear that Capone was everywhere in the city. Usually there's no good source on it whatsoever. Often there's no source at all until about the 1970s. Sometimes he's said to have been in buildings that weren't even there yet at the time. There's a great story about him renting out an entire floor of the Stevens Hotel. Try finding an early source on it that's in any way reliable. Now, he also can be traced to the courthouse. And this is the site of the old jail where they used to hang people here. But around the back, and I'll speed up the walk here a bit. Around the back is the old courthouse. And Capone was occasionally brought in here for questioning as well. He was never put on trial in here. But he was brought in for questioning after Frank Capone was killed. This is him inside of the building. and also was brought in after a would-be hitman named John Duffy was taken for a one-way ride. This was a guy who had brought in by the O'Banion gang to work as a hitman, did a lot of talking about what a great hitman he was, but then he never actually shot anybody. The O'Banion gang apparently decided that he was a loose cannon, lured him out to 2222 South Wabash to be picked up, and brought him on what is thought to be the first one-way ride. Now, there was a theory at the time that it was actually a police officer who did it because Duffy was breaking into his stash of bootleg liquor, but more likely the O'Banion gang had him picked up outside of 2222 South Wabash, the Four Deuces, a place well known to be run by Al Capone, just so it would look like Capone might have been involved in the hit. This body was found by the side of the road. Witnesses said he had been outside of the Four Deuces, so they brought in about everybody, including Al Brown, otherwise known as Al Scarface Capone of the Four Deuces Saloon. He was questioned and said something like, "I'm just a regular businessman. For no reason at all, everybody's always trying to drag me into something." Sure. And the Four Deuces was a building that looked like this. It was right down the block from Colosimo's place. Looked like this at the time. Officially, it was a furniture store, though newspapers referred to it as a really, really nasty resort. Here's how it looked as of the 1960s before it was torn down. Now, shortly after the Duffy affair, there was a rumor going around that Capone had been shot. Al showed up himself and said those rumors were greatly exaggerated. So, in late 1924, John Torrio was getting a little bit fed up with Dean O'Banion, who was the head of the Northside mob at the time. He had double-crossed him a couple of times in various swindles, wanted him out of the way. Trouble was, Mike Merlot was still around and didn't want any fighting. He was the head of the Union Siciliana. If the head of the Union said not to do something, you didn't do it. But meanwhile, O'Banion's day job was working for Schofield's Flowers, in which he was a partner. He probably worked at the location that was up by Devon and Broadway most often. That was a lot closer to his house. But then there was this one on State Street where the new One Chicago building is now, across from Holy Name Cathedral. This is what it looked like at the time. So Dean O'Banion was working there, and I believe the reason he came out here to work on the State Street location one grim day in November of 1924 is that Mike Merlot had just died. This was a really big deal. He was put into a really big mausoleum, and the funeral was just huge. You can see outside of the place, like truckloads and truckloads worth of flowers. So with all those flowers coming in, it was going to be a big day down at the State Street Schofields. So while he was doing things there, he wasn't really thinking with his feet. So he didn't realize that Torrio would now say, "Okay, Merlot's out of the way. Nothing is stopping me from taking out Dean O'Banion." Now, once again, it's hard to know exactly who he brought in for this. It was thought at the time that it was possibly the Jenna brothers. These were some guys who worked for Torrio. They had found a loophole in the law saying that you could still manufacture rubbing alcohol. So they were paying people all over Little Italy to work on to manufacture rubbing alcohol. They were operating out of a place at 1022 West Taylor, where this restaurant is now. So one day they walked into the place on the day of Mike Merlot's funeral. O'Banion said, "Hey boys, you here for Merlot's?" And they gave him what is called the Chicago handshake. Grabbed his hand as though to shake it, then pulled forward, stuck a gun in his gut, and fired several times. That was the end of Dean O'Banion and the beginning of the gang war. He was buried over here at Mount Carmel as well, not too far away from Mike Merlot. Not too far from where the Jennas were eventually going to be. And the Jennas became deeply unpopular after this. One by one in 1925, they were bumped off. And by the end of it, we don't even know which gang was doing it anymore. But here's Dean's individual marker. And already with this, the newspapers were starting to romanticize these guys. This was the headline the day O'Banion was shot. "O'Banion gang like pirates of olden days. Beer trucks their ship of gold." So about a year later, to get revenge, I gotta move around a little bit. So this was Torrio's block down here on South Clyde. Now, in revenge for the assassination of Dean O'Banion, which everybody knew Torrio would probably be behind, he was driving out here with his wife, stepped out of the car, and was accosted by three guys, Vinny the Schemer Drucci, Bugs Moran, and Jaime Weiss, who had kind of jointly taken over as heads of the North Side mob. They came out here and shot him right in the face. Though Torrio, to his credit, survived and was smart enough to just retire at that point. He turned everything over to Al Capone. So, to get revenge, Capone rented a place above Schofield's Flowers across the street from Holy Name Cathedral, and about a year later, Jaime Weiss was shot to death as he was walking by along with his lawyer. This is his lawyer's body lying down on the ground there, and it is frequently said that this hole in the wall at Holy Name Cathedral is one of the bullet holes. It is definitely not. This is an old thing for holding up a plaque, but there is a lot of damage in that cornerstone, and also the staircase they built in front of it goes right up to cover a lot of the old damage. So Jaime also ended up over at Mount Carmel Cemetery. And eventually so did Vinny the Schemer Drucci under his original name. Now, Drucci was known as the Schemer because he was always coming up with plots like, hey, let's go to London and steal the crown jewels. Let's run one of our guys for mayor. He also used to like dressing up as a priest just to walk around messing with people. One time he had O'Banion beat him up while he was dressed as a priest, so people would be like, whoa, don't mess with that O'Banion guy. I saw him beat him up a priest over on Michigan Boulevard. Now, you tend to hear that Capone owned about every house in the city. The one that he did own was down here at 7244 South Prairie. I'll just move in on this. It's the larger one here. It's not quite as grandiose as like Big Jim O'Leary's mansion. Capone had to keep kind of a low profile. But this was just the home where he lived with his family. When his brother Frank was killed, this is a picture of it. You can still see the same house next door. And once again, it was covered with $20,000 in flowers in 1924 money. Now, Tony Capone. So Capone then took over. And meanwhile, over in City Hall, there was a young assistant state's attorney named William McSwiggan, who was known as like the untouchable guy. Everybody respected his integrity. He was known as going after the police. Capone said that he was friends with them. He said, last time I saw him, I gave him a bottle of scotch for his old man. But then one day, McSwiggan was shot to death out on the west side, where he was, for some reason, hanging out with the O'Donnell gang. We're kind of a satellite gang who sometimes worked for Capone and sometimes not. They went back and forth quite a bit. But for some reason, McSwiggan was out with them. We still don't know why. Some say that they were just old friends of his from the neighborhood. Some say that he was so obsessed with criminology that he wanted to really see what it was like to be a gangster, to get inside of the gangster mind. Others say he was just on the take or something. But McSwiggan was shot to death in 1926. This became a really big deal. It was generally credited to Capone. Also raised his profile quite a bit. This was the kind of guy who would take out an assistant state's attorney, launching a big investigation. Dude on the right here is Detective Sergeant John W. Norton, who had been with the police ever since he had been investigating the H.H. Holmes Castle back in 1895. They went around through Capone's house and found, like, guns being used as curtain rods, secret passages, all the stuff that they were rumored to have found in the H.H. Holmes building. They actually did find at Capone's. They could never quite pin this one on Capone, but in the process of the raids, they did find a ledger, which eventually would be Capone's undoing a few years later. So at this point, the two gangs were at war, the north side and the south side. Frankie Yale, Capone's old boss, switched sides and ended up being shot to death in New York. Various people became head of the Unione Siciliana and were assassinated one after the other. Eventually, there was a guy by the name of Antonio Lombardo who became the head. He was a Capone stooge. Capone had personally arranged for him to become the head. He was desperate to be the head himself, but he wasn't Sicilian. Lombardo was going to change those rules. But right out here where Chase Tower is now at Madison and Dearborn, one of the busiest intersections of the city, right at rush hour, Lombardo was shot to death in front of a whole crowd of witnesses. The witnesses were watching as they moved an airplane into the building that was going to be a department store display. So they were all looking up and didn't see the guys with the guns come up. Lombardo, too, ended up right over here at Mount Carmel Cemetery. So that takes us to late 1928. At this point, the gangsters had apparently called a truce for a while, but Lombardo's killing ended all of that. It may have been revenge for Frankie Yale, may not have been, but we certainly know that the same guns that were used to kill Frankie Yale in New York were also used in probably the most famous event in Chicago gangland history, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And there's supposed to be a video right here. Now, come on. We'll pause this a second. I'll try to find it. As I said, there's some changes in Dropbox. It's not working like it's supposed to with Max right now. Should be up in just a second now. There we go. Right here on the 2100 block of North Clark, there was a garage called the SMC Cartage Company. And on Valentine's Day in 1929, since the video's messing up on me, I'll just kind of make myself bigger here. So Valentine's Day in 1929, 7 guys affiliated with the Bugs Moran gang had gathered in this little garage, the SMC Cartage Company. They were probably waiting for Moran himself to show up, but instead, 2 guys dressed as cops and 2 guys in plain clothes came in. And they lined everybody up against the wall like it was a regular old liquor raid, and they would have just casually complied because, hey, liquor hadn't been delivered yet. There was nothing there to find. But at this point, the details get a little bit fuzzy. We imagine they probably said something like, all right, which one of you mugs is Bugs Moran? And Moran wasn't there yet, so nobody said anything. So, since nobody said anything, they just shot all 7 of them. It's a more gruesome photo of it. I'll just leave it up as a diagram there. So, at this point, the guys dressed as cops marched the guys in plain clothes out at gunpoint, so anybody walking by would have thought it was just a regular old liquor raid. There's the Chicago Daily News the next day. Massacre of 7 of Moran gang. Victims are lined against wall. 1 volley kills all. Capone rises to supreme command in the underworld. Moran was not actually present at the time. He's really the guy who got away. Now, there was one guy who wasn't quite dead yet when the police showed up. There was a guy by the name of Frank Gusenberg. They brought him to the hospital and, tried to get him to talk. Said, Frank, you got to tell us who did this to you? Who shot you? But he had to be a gangster right to the end, so his last thing was, nobody shot nobody. Nothing happened here. And then he died of having been shot roughly 17 times. Now, among the suspects to it are a couple of guys named Scalisi and Anselmi who had been hitmen for Capone over the years. They were eventually found beaten to death by the side of the road in Indiana. There's a very lurid story that goes around that they had been caught trying to take over for Capone, so they were invited out to a dinner, wined and dined, then beaten to death with baseball bats. Which, it's possible that's what happened. We really have no way of knowing one way or the other. But making it open that they were going to try to kill Capone and take over is exactly the kind of boneheaded move these guys would have pulled. So is shooting all 7 of the guys, but not the person they were supposed to kill, which brought down a lot of heat on Capone. They're among the suspects. There's also a group that Capone occasionally used that have come to be known as the American Boys. It's not something Capone called them. It's something one of their wives called them. Capone himself would always insist that he was American. He got mad if you called him Italian. Forensics indicate that these guys had probably been the shooters. They can trace the stash of guns was found on one of their cars once, and they were traced to both the massacre and the Frankie Yale killing in New York, using some very new versions of forensics. And there was one guy who officially wasn't one of the gang. He was an eye doctor. He's buried at Reinhard Schwimmer. He's over at Rose Hill Cemetery now. We've tended to believe his mother that he just liked to hang out with the gangsters. He wasn't one of them. It is also often said that Machine Gun Jack McGurn may have been the guy who did it. Certainly a lot of the gangsters thought so. About 5 years later on the anniversary, he was shot to death in a bowling alley and a Valentine was left at his feet. Let's cover just a couple of other people here. Up in Westridge, this very large still standing house was the home of Joe Aiello, who worked with Moran at least off and on, and with Frankie Yale as well, and had a plot to kill Capone. He had a whole stash of dynamite in a place where the custard shop down the block is now, right across from Indian Boundary Park in Westridge. His funeral was held out of here. They didn't kill him here. They killed him down on the south side. But they killed him all right. Capone's main base of operations for most of this was over here on South Michigan. It was a place called the Metropole Hotel. It was kind of a B-list hotel, but that's usually where Capone hung out, and he spent most of his time slipping through the back door of B-list hotels. You tend to hear that he was everywhere, but really he had to keep a pretty low profile. Half the people in town seemed to want to kill him. His more famous space was a little bit further south on Michigan, the old Lexington Hotel, which stood up until the 1990s, right where this thing is now. Also, wasn't one of the fancier hotels in the city. It was okay. This is the famous place where Geraldo found a vault down in the basement and made an absolute fool of himself. Now, I don't think anybody who was really following the Capone story over the years would have been surprised that there was nothing in there. Capone was only in this place for a little while, and mainly while he was on trial. It would have been a terrible place to stash anything. But we do know that Frank Lesh, who was a part of the Secret Six, a group of Chicago businessmen who organized to try to make things in Chicago uncomfortable for Capone, did have a meeting with him here, and noted off and on that Capone sat at a desk with either a portrait of George Washington or a portrait of Mayor Big Bill Thompson back behind him. Lesh told the story a lot, and it tended to change. But it was these guys who helped organize bringing in people like Eliot Ness, who organized his group, the Untouchables, who was later the subject of a number of books and movies of varying degrees of accuracy. There's occasionally been talk of putting a statue of Eliot Ness up in Chicago someplace, but historians have generally been against it because people who knew Eliot Ness said he didn't do anywhere close to the number of things that he said that he did. He spent most of his time behind the desk. Yes, Fred Getz in the comments, that is correct. We traced his grave a while ago. Now, one other place that we can trace Capone to is right where the Crane statue is now. This was the site of the federal court building. I got to get the picture of this up. That shouldn't take more than a second. It doesn't take as long to download the pictures. Ah, yes, the old federal court building. So, eventually they did manage to get Capone arrested on tax evasion charges. Everybody knows it was tax evasion. But he was put on trial over here in this building. It was at this point that it came out that he bought a lot of his clothes and a lot of his underwear at one building that is still standing, the Marshall Field building. He favored custom-tailored union suits made out of ladies' glove silk, something that the jurors thought was absolutely hilarious. But these were very expensive underpants. He bought them at the Marshall Field. You tend to hear everybody's uncle was Capone's tailor. He got his clothes at Marshall Field. One other place we can trace him is just next to the federal court, still standing, is the Marquette building. His lawyers had his offices in this building. Capone would go over to his lawyers' offices for lunch. You'll notice most of the places I can trace him to are places like where he had lunch, where he bought his underwear. Places where he's rumored to have had parties tend to be very, very difficult to trace. One other thing we can trace him to is after he was convicted and sent to jail, he changed trains on the way to prison here at Dearborn Station. And it was at Dearborn Station that day. It is thought to be the only time that he and Eliot Ness were ever in the same place at the same time. One of the more common rumors is they say that he had a club under the dome of the Jewelers building up here. Said to be a place called the Stratosphere Club, where he was either the owner or a patron, depending on who is telling the story. The Stratosphere Club was a real place, but it didn't open until years after Capone had gone to prison, and years after liquor was legal again. It had kind of a hot air balloon theme to it. They advertised themselves as being a real hot spot for radio stars, but it didn't last very long. You had to take like 3 elevators and a staircase to get up there, then the prices were high. There's not a whole lot of documentation about it. There's some. He is also very frequently said, that's wrong button. Very frequently said to have hung out at the Green Mill Cocktail Lounge, though that too is very, very shaky data. Exactly which gangster owned this place and which one didn't. It's generally said that Machine Gun Jack McGurn had some kind of a say in it, though the club itself denies it. They've let people go on the Capone stuff for quite a bit, but there's no data whatsoever. There is a first-hand account of him hanging out at the Sunset Cafe. which is now a beauty shop in Bronzeville. Until recently, it was a hardware store. They still got some murals on the wall. But the piano player, Earl Father Hines, told a story years later that Capone came in there and it was, he said, we're going to be paying you guys, but we want you to be like those three monkeys. You don't see nothing, you don't hear nothing, you don't say nothing. I'm not 100% sure I believe Earl Father Hines in this story. Everybody from Chicago in those days had to have their Capone story, and he didn't tell it till years later, but it's quite possible. Moving over here to finish up with all of the graves. Now, Capone was initially buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery, but was quietly moved to Mount Carmel, where his entire family is. So quite a lot of the gangsters are here. Genevieve Forbes Herrick, the Tribune's ace crime reporter, once reported at a funeral of one of the Jenna brothers. She overheard a guy saying, well, Mike Merlot's over there, there's O'Banion, and now Jenna's right here. When Judgment Day comes and then tombs open up, there's going to be hell to pay in this cemetery. And that was just when they only had a few of these guys. There's a lot more now. Now, on a recent trip to Cleveland, we located a marker for Elliot Ness, and this is a cenotaph. He's not actually buried here. There's just a marker here placed by an admirer. He ended up kind of drinking himself to death. He's right next to Harvey Pekar, the cartoonist, best known for American Splendor. It's kind of cool people put pens all over his grave. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me on this holiday weekend. I want to give a quick plug to the upcoming tours. This one runs a little bit short sometimes. Thursday night, I will be on the road. I'm not sure I'll be able to do a tour, so I'm just going to say, we'll see. Maybe I'll be settled into the hotel in time that I can run something. Maybe not. We'll find out. We'll be there. Find out. I should be back in town just in time for Sunday morning. We're going to be doing a hybrid tour. It's going to be an in-person tour and a walking tour. Go to MysteriousChicago.com for tickets or the events page around here. You can join for the regular ticket price, or you can watch online for the same basis we're doing here. Free donation suggested. Should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., that's all over at cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. Once again, MysteriousChicago.com has links to all of this stuff, including all of the TikTok stuff that we've been doing. So with that, everybody, we're going to put the Benny Goodman back on and let everybody get back to their casserole making. Thanks for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. Let's hang out a bit.
Of the bugle call rang.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Eleanor. Thanks, Marcia. Thanks, Betsy. Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks, Londa, David, and Dina. Thanks for that, Eleanor. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Phoenix. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Octavio, Georgia, Diane. Thanks, Carol and Anita. Is Pullman present? I felt like Pullman was present. Audrey, I could go for some casserole right now. Dude, there's got to be a kosher for Passover casserole I can make, right? Yeah, Cindy, it kind of occurred to me after I put this up, oh, we're going to be showing a whole bunch of Catholic cemetery stuff on Easter. That might not be entirely correct. But nobody complained. Still got my tea. But can I find a kosher for Passover casserole recipe that incorporates only stuff that I've already got in the house? Octavio, maybe. Maybe. I'm still working on some new stuff here. Anita, it's kind of nice we stay enough under the radar. Hello, Robert. Anybody just joining us, we're now in the post-tour hang portion. Tour started at 10 a.m. Central. But as soon as we're done with the hangout, it'll be up on the videos page. Matt, sure. Matt, yes, he is buried at Calvary. We found his grave one day for Find a Grave Friday. Now, Cronin is why we incorporated all of the suburbs, in fact. And why, Lakeview and places like Lakeview and Englewood and places like that were still suburbs as of 1889. But then with the Cronin investigation, it became very clear that having just the one big police department would have helped. The fur babies. Well, Miles is in the window over here. Priya, last I saw, was in bed with Ronnie. Ooh, Gene, that sounds good. Now, let me bring Miles over. Miles? You like it chilly out there? Miles is all chilly from sitting in the window now. Eric, not sure about 9 a.m. People tend to want to sleep in. Okay. Unless I make a mistake again and start broadcasting at 9. How about Miles? It's okay. There we go. Say hi to all the nice people. Thanks, Jim. And yeah, I found some pants. Kristen, yeah, I'll put you on the list. You're already on. It would help if those of you using Patreon tickets just send me an email so I know so I can keep track of stuff. Once again, Patreon's a better deal than ever now. There's a few slots open for the tourist tier, and that now costs less than an actual ticket. Carol, that sounds nice. Well, it's going to be 69 in Graceland next weekend for the tour. That is also nice. Audrey, I'm sure you do. Bring some friends. Yeah, Dana, if you got Patreon tickets stored up, by all means, bring as many people as you need. Todd, yeah, you should be able to pre-order the Graceland book at all of the usual book ordering places. I still got some messages I got to respond to as well. Lauren, enjoy.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Thanks, Amy. Todd, hope to see you on one of them. Kristen, that is true. Don't forget your book. Thanks, Tiffany. Happy Easter to those who celebrate. Oh yeah, Carol, naughty, naughty. Ooh, Audrey, that sounds good. I probably do. Yeah. Bob, you got it. It's kind of a small group today with Easter stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and just plug the upcoming stuff once again. Thursday, who knows what's going to happen, but watch out this week for a lot of little random virtual tours over the course of the day for live from New York, where I'll be going about 3 times in the next month or so. And then next Sunday, I'll be fresh back from New York for a hybrid Graceland tour, both in person or online. You can join us any number of different ways. Patreon tickets are now a better deal than ever. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Happy Easter to those who celebrate. Happy Passover, ongoing Passover as well. So thanks a lot, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago, saying to stay safe, stay strong, and of course, if you can, stay spooky.